Oh man, Southwest has been in the news for quite a few weeks now. I'm sure everybody has heard about the epic meltdown in regards to what happened with travel. But what I don't think many people know is that several days before, there was actually something pretty terrible that occurred internally in regards to a memo that went out to some of the Southwest team. And I know I've been out and this is kind of older news, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk about this because as it relates to small business and leading people, we're so big on culture. I think it's a really important one to talk about and I think learn from it on what not to do and what we can do better.
Yeah. And, good brands make bad mistakes sometimes. And so I would imagine that this memo or note isn't a representation of the typical brand we know and love as fun, carefree, so on and so forth. Those of you who know, I was a influencer for Southwest at one point. But this one here, it really is a doozy. We have a tweet that has a screenshot of the note, and Summer, what do you think about what's seen in this note, and what are the practical applications we can give to our audience of like, hey, don't do this.
Yes. Well, I think first it's important to know that, when you think about Southwest as a big brand and what they were founded on, they're known as the love airline. They're known for caring so deeply about their passengers and their employees. It is the root of their culture. And I think that is one of the reasons why this memo that went out December 21st to team members is just so shocking. There's a copy of the memo on Twitter, and perhaps we'll be able to link it in the show notes. But for those of you just following along, this memo was sent out by Chris Johnson, who is the vice president of ground operations. And this was on December 21st, as I mentioned, a couple of days prior to all of the mess with holiday travel. And its subject line is state of operational emergency. And I'm going to summarize it, and we're going to talk about some of the key things that are in here. So he mentions that there was an unusual high number of absences, people calling in sick that afternoon and that evening from the Denver ramp agent employees, and that in order to safely run the operation, there was going to be a state of operational emergency declared, and therefore, like new rules were going to be in effect. And this is where it gets really messy. So, first, any employee who was alleging illness, alleging is a key word, is going to have to bring a doctor's note to excuse them. And they were not going to accept any sort of like telehealth or telemedicine. So let's just stop there. Okay, so a company saying alleging illness. I mean, right off the bat, that doesn't strike me as a really great message to send to your team. I mean, it already sounds like we're not trusting you, right? Hey, Joey, since you alleged that you were sick yesterday,
Yeah,
I need you to
it's
bring me a note.
and if you think about just the nature of what we've been through the past 3 years, if someone feels like they have symptoms of anything, it had always been, or it had recently been, best practice of like, hey, play it safe, right? Doctor's note or not, like if you have these symptoms, don't show up. In the same way that Southwest might tell their passengers, if you have these symptoms, consider not going. Right. So that one, yeah, that's a tough one to get past for sure.
Right? Especially with, we've got COVID, RSV, we've got flu. You do not want sick people going into an office or a doctor's office if they don't have to. So that's the first
Right.
issue. So the second issue is that they were going to have emergency overtime. So essentially, what that meant is that overtime was mandatory, and they said that if you fail to comply, you would be considered insubordinate and you will be terminated.
Mm, mm, mm.
Joey, how does that work for people who have personal obligations outside of their job at Southwest?
Well, I mean, in an at will state, in an at will organization, I mean, you can choose to put boundaries in place, and you shouldn't be subject to termination if such is the case. I realize that I am not in this VP's shoes. It is not my organization to run. I don't know all of the options that were presented at the time. Um, but I can't imagine that looking at everything, this is the right, even if it's the right intent, it's definitely not the right messaging. And so it's a drop ball from a beloved brand. But no, if you told me I have to show up for mandatory overtime and I've already booked plans for the holidays, I'm probably going to tell you, yeah, I might do this to be a team player in 2020, but in 2023, you better believe I'm going someplace else because you've just showed me that um, this mantra, people don't like it, but it's basically profit over people is what you basically told me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concerns with the messaging in here. And in this memo, there's a couple other notes, but they're all kind of a similar theme, right? Which is we need people show up. We're demanding that you do, or you may be at risk for losing your job. And, I think about so many reasons why these issues or why this will create issues for Southwest, because it's kind of like, well, if you don't have enough people today, and you're telling the people that you do have that if you don't do what we are commanding you to do, you're going to lose your job. Well, Southwest, you're going to have less people. So isn't that compounding the problem?
Yeah, and we saw this before, unfortunately, with our friends at Twitter, with Elon coming in kind of with the iron fist and saying, putting all of these demands on coworkers after there were layoffs, after there were resignations, and it didn't quite work out that well. So I get being in a crunch time, but the scary thing to me is that this memo was from December 21st, and so many people woke up, uh, present company included, woke up on Christmas thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna jump on a plane and life's gonna be great," right? And so, it's hard to have such a mess up around a holiday period, because holidays are such a memory for people. So, you never know who's going to get to Christmas 23 and say, I'm not choosing X airline because remember when we tried to fly and we had this like this chaos. So it's tough. I mean, it's a strong brand. Hopefully they rebound. But no, it's definitely something to learn as a employer, as like, don't don't call people's bluff because there's more to life than your organization.
Yes, and there's a couple of articles about this, but I think ultimately it comes down to culture, right? The culture that the company was founded upon is so drastically different than the culture that's displayed in this memo. And like you, Joey, I was stuck from a Southwest flight in a DFW airport on December 23rd, just a couple days after this memo came out, and employees were exhausted. I remember talking to one at 3:30 a.m. After I stood in line for hours trying to get to the ticket counter for canceled flights, and to think that this is what was leading up to what became multiple days of a nightmare for not only travelers but employees really does concern me. So I do hope that they recognize this as a big misstep
Hmm.
in the big picture, and that they do the right thing not only for their customers but for their team members. There's a lot to fix here.
Absolutely, absolutely. But we've seen it and we've made our own mistakes, right, in one way or another. But strong brands bounce back and do right by their colleagues and their customers. So personally, I'm rooting for the brand. I don't think that it's a fatal scenario, but it's definitely something we all want to learn from. I would say it's better to learn from someone else's mistakes than your own. So let's take the time to glean the meaningful applications from this scenario.